So my name is Catherine Crestani. I'm an inner authority guide, a writer and speaker on human potential and conscious leadership. And that is just a fancy way of saying that I help women lead themselves through their life by listening to themselves and stop putting themselves last so they can feel joy, empowered, and they feel connected to life again, including to themselves. And then part of what I've done in my life is I also have a podcast called Willow Healing Matters that I am the host of. And I get to interview people about all different things across the world because that fills up my cup. And then in doing that, I also am the author of My Virtual Obsession, which is a psychological thriller that looks at when loneliness can lead us to make weird choices that lead to obsession.
So, would you like to dive deep more into my virtual obsession? What guided you to write this? Like, what was the inspiration and the motivation behind the making of the book?
I had a dream, Desi. I kid you not. I dreamt the whole thing from start to finish, and I woke up and I saw it like a movie, and I went, I need to write this into a book. So I did. I started writing 15 minutes a day, and just started letting this book flow through me. Like I had no idea what I was writing. I just allowed it to come through from remembering that dream that came to me in my sleep. And then after a few months, I'm like, oh my goodness, I have a 90,000 word novel. Like, wow, like this is amazing. And then I went through the process of editing it and reflecting back on it. And then I realized when I was putting it through AI actually to say, okay, how do I market this and what do I put it? Wow. And then it's like, oh, here are all the themes that you're covering. And I went, oh, that's all the clients that are coming to me at the moment. Like, this is an amazing reflection. I just didn't realize that that's how my subconscious put it into a book.
And I like that. That's actually cool. So, um, do you normally write down all your dreams, or was just this was just like the first time you've ever dived deep into your dreams and journaled?
I've actually had a lot of dreams since then, and I have all these synopsises, if you will, for books to keep writing. But this was the one that I really felt to do. This was the first one I had, and this is the one that I actually saw coming into life. Like I said, I saw it as a movie, so it was really beautiful just to allow it to flow. I've started the next one, but I've had this point where I don't like to push creativity because I feel then you end up hating what you're doing, right? So I'm not that person who'll
And
be
that's
like, I
true.
have to commit and do this every day. Yeah. And then it feels forced rather than, and I
Yeah.
don't want to not love writing anymore. And then I'll have days where I'll sit there and I'll write chapter after chapter because I'm in the flow and I'm preferring that. And I feel that's more honoring our divine feminine, if you will, and like honoring that part of ourselves that allows us to be in flow rather than push, 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 which is more that the hustle culture that we've grown up with.
Yes. Now let's dive deep into how does loneliness change the way we attach to people in technology?
Well, loneliness isn't a bad thing, but I feel because people are avoiding the loneliness because it makes them reflect on themselves and make them reflect on vulnerable moments. And then the thoughts start in your head and all those conversations that we have with ourselves in our mind. That is where loneliness can lead to us spiraling. So I love moments to myself because
Me
I love
too.
just having that moment where I could, yeah, especially being a mom and doing everything else I do, I actually like those moments where I just get to be. And so loneliness isn't a bad thing. What can happen, but is that we don't want to face ourselves and face those things happening in our head. So we go to other things to avoid that. And often, too, there's been like a lot of pressure happening in our lives from society, from culture, from our families, especially as women, where we get like, oh, you're 30, you should be married and have this many kids by now and have your life sorted out. And it's like, no, it's just beginning. Like, why should I have all the answers right now? But those are the thoughts that spiral in our head when we're lonely. So then people are turning to technology to either escape their relationships, escape their lives, or escape that loneliness of being vulnerable with themselves.
And I absolutely agree with that response because I'm an introvert. So I wouldn't say I'm lonely, but I love isolation. I love being secluded. And, you know, so thank you so much for answering that. Now I want to ask, I want to dive deep into why are people choosing emotional safety over real intimacy? I thought that was real interesting to dive deep into.
Because it's easier. So um, from someone who was married and got divorced and then found myself again and had a partnerships breakdown, business partnerships, had my company breakdown. Sometimes it is easier just to stay in what you know. Sometimes it is easier just to feel like there's somebody there for you to come home to and not to feel that gaping void of, oh, okay, I've got to face myself in these moments. Because really, the biggest enemy we have is ourselves. When we have to face all those demons that are in our head, or we have to, create all that space in terms of, oh no, like this is what I think about myself, but I don't want to actually acknowledge that's what I think about myself and love those darker parts of myself. Instead, I'm going to sit there and avoid that by filling the conversation with somebody else who maybe I don't really feel attached to, but at the moment it just feels better being in their company and listening to them drag on than me facing myself. So a lot of the time it's an escape as well, because we're putting our attention to things outside ourselves instead of facing the demons that are happening inside ourselves.
And I think the key word is escape. So, absolutely. And let's say something feels like a connection, but something isn't. Explain the psychology of artificial connections in the modern dating scene. And I think that's very important because now, I mean, you got Facebook now has dating. Grinder is like very popular. And I mean, a lot of the younger generation, I mean, their love interest on social media and wondering why things just go crazy.
Well, first of all, Desi, I want to say there's nothing wrong with meeting someone on a virtual app. That's how I met my husband now. So I have nothing against it, right? But at the same time, what I learned from dating during that time was people create these false personas of who they actually are to meet what they think other people are looking for. And this is where the danger lies, because you're not showing up authentically and as yourself. Instead, you're creating this avatar of what you think people want you to be like or who they want you to be like. The other danger is people are relying more and more on AI and technology to be them, to make the responses. I was talking to a relationship coach a few months ago, and she said she had a client writing her SMS reply to her husband, not asking for advice on how to reply, actually scripting the whole thing, cut and pasting it in. So at what point do you stop being you and you're allowing, the technology to reply for you? And this is where I've had a lot of clients too, and they get stuck in the, oh, why hasn't that person responded to my Snapchat? Or why hasn't that person opened my DM? Or why aren't they liking my story? And we get so stuck in this loop of valuing this technology connection. And sometimes I just sit there and go, they're just busy. Like life happens. I don't sit there on social media all day waiting for someone to like what I've posted. I post it and get off, and that's my choice. I don't want to sit there all day. I've got things to do and people to see, and then so there's all these kinds of aspects of that. And then how do you know what's real and what's not? So people are then creating these versions of themselves because this is what they think they have to be for that person or in the moment. And I know I've been in that relationship where, you give up parts of yourselves because you think that's going to make the other person happy, when really you should just be allowing yourself to be you and growing together with that person. And that is when you get a really powerful, strong relationship. So all of a sudden, we've got this like screen between us, and people are like, oh my goodness, I'm so in love with this person, but I've never met them. And I was like, okay, I understand that component, but at the same time, you still need to have that meeting and have that actually real life connection, because how do you know it's just not all something that you've created in your head? And just the other week, I was talking to a friend and I actually created a post about it on my social media. And I said, sometimes the hardest relationship to walk away from is the one you've created in your mind of what hasn't happened and what you want to happen, but it never takes place.
Absolutely. So, thank you so much for joining. And before we end, would you like to share a little bit about your virtual book club and why book readers should join?
Yeah, so if you want some bonus chapters, if you're like me and you always like to see what happens to the characters afterwards, they're on there. But also, I post weekly reflections that link back to the book, but also allow you to go deeper into what's happening in your life. So you can ask questions about yourself and also about the book. So it's this beautiful, just little online space called My Book Obsession, and it's on Substack. And you can just allow yourself to be more immersed in life and ask the questions that are difficult. Like, oh, where have I suddenly, turned from light stalking of wanting to know somebody into a full on obsession? Where is that line being crossed in my life? Or
Yeah.
where have I let loneliness lead me to those decisions that don't necessarily align with who I am? And through doing that, it allows you to just reflect and ask those tough questions, because the more you get to know yourself and honor yourself, the easier it is to attract that partner that aligns with you and to show up authentically in all aspects of your life.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for joining. Um, from America all the way to Australia. Hope to have you again here soon, and I look forward to checking out my virtual obsession.
Thank you, Desi. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.